They say every neighborhood hides its secrets, but Whispering Pines hid something much darker, something that looked like perfection until you stared too long and saw the rot beneath the paint. I used to think it was the kind of place where people waved from driveways and trimmed their lawns just to keep things beautiful. But beauty here came with rules, and those rules came with teeth. The woman who wrote them, Karen Matthews, the HOA president, believed she was the law itself. And when someone dared to challenge her order, she didn't just fight back, she destroyed lives. I know, because I was one of them. It's strange looking back now to realize how quietly it started. There were no police lights at first, no shouting matches or lawsuits, just the faint sound of a clipboard snapping shut, the whisper of a pen signing a violation, the steady tightening of control around every family who dared to step out of line. Karen called it protecting the community. But what she really protected was her power. And the day I brought my sister and nephew to stay with me, she found the one line she could never cross and walk away unscathed. I didn't know then that the simple kindness of helping my family would spark a war. I didn't know that a ramp, a small strip of aluminum meant to give an 11-year-old boy in a wheelchair a taste of freedom, would become the spark that burned down Karen's empire. And I definitely didn't know how far she'd go to prove that her rules mattered more than human decency. By the time it was over, police cars lined the cul-de-sac, neighbors filmed from behind their curtains. And the woman who once ruled Whispering Pines with a smile was being led away in handcuffs. I should have felt victorious, but all I could think was how fast a peaceful street could turn into a battlefield when one person decided their power was more important than anyone else's rights. How did it get that far? How did a neighborhood built on quiet conformity become the stage for one of the most shocking, humiliating arrests our town had ever seen? Keep watching, because once you know what she did, you'll never look at an HOA the same way again. Whispering Pines looked like a postcard come to life, the kind of suburban paradise people dreamed about when they thought of safety, order, and comfort. The streets were lined with perfectly trimmed boxwoods and flowering pear trees that bloomed like clouds in the spring. Every house gleamed with the same manicured precision: beige siding, white trim, freshly painted shutters, and driveways so spotless they looked pressure-washed daily. Children's bikes were parked neatly on porches. Flags fluttered from mailboxes, and on Saturdays, you could hear the faint buzz of hedge trimmers, harmonizing like a suburban symphony. At first glance, it was everything I wanted: a stable, quiet place to start over. My name is Emily Carter, and when I bought the small 2-story colonial on Sycamore Lane, I thought I'd finally found peace. After years of apartment living and constant noise, I wanted a garden, a little space, and the kind of community where people still said good morning. Whispering Pines promised that. The brochure called it a neighborhood built on pride and partnership. The reality, though, was something much different. The HOA was the heartbeat of Whispering Pines, or maybe its chokehold. On paper, it was a simple homeowners association, a board of residents tasked with maintaining the neighborhood's integrity. But in practice, it was a kingdom, and the queen of that kingdom was Karen Matthews. Everyone called her Mrs. Matthews out of habit, not respect. Short blonde hair, always styled perfectly, pearl earrings that never seemed to move, and that ever-present clipboard she carried like a badge of authority. She'd been president of the HOA for 7 years. No one else had ever run against her because no one dared. Karen ruled through subtle intimidation. She didn't yell, not at first. She smiled, the kind of smile that could make you second-guess yourself. You wouldn't want to bring down the neighborhood's value, would you? She'd say when someone left a basketball hoop by the curb too long or parked a truck overnight in the street. Every house, every lawn, every flower bed in Whispering Pines existed under her quiet surveillance. The rumor was that she'd once reported her own husband for leaving the trash bins out on the wrong day, a story everyone laughed at nervously, but never openly. Confirmed, the rest of the board was a reflection of her, obedient, fearful, and strangely devoted. There was Mark, tall, balding, and always wearing golf polos even when it rained. He handled maintenance violations, which really meant he was Karen's messenger, dropping off warning slips on doors at dawn before anyone could see him. Then there was Linda, the treasurer, soft-spoken but with eyes that darted around every meeting, making sure Karen approved of every number she read aloud. The only one who seemed remotely human was Richard, the vice president. He'd been in the neighborhood longer than anyone, retired military, a man who respected order but looked uneasy when Karen took things too far. He often sat quietly in meetings, rubbing the bridge of his nose like someone who knew he'd made a deal with the devil and couldn't find a way out. When I moved in, they welcomed me, at least on the surface. I still remember the first meet and greet on my lawn. Karen brought a tray of muffins wrapped in perfect cellophane. "Blueberry," she said with a practiced smile. "Homemade." But when I bit into one later, I could tell they were from the store. That was Whispering Pines. Everything was polished, presented, and hollow inside. For a few months, life was peaceful. I kept my lawn trimmed, repainted the shutters, and waved at neighbors during morning walks. I even joined the HOA Facebook group, where people posted about lost cats, garage sales, and, more often, complaints about minor rule violations. It was strange how much time they spent discussing things like mailbox paint shades and hedge height. But I ignored it. That was the price of living somewhere nice, I told myself. Then my sister Sarah called. She was a nurse, exhausted from double shifts, and she needed somewhere quiet to rest for a while. Her son, Mason, was 11, bright, funny, and confined to a wheelchair after a spinal condition left his legs weak. I didn't hesitate. "Come stay as long as you need," I said. The guest room was ready, and I even started planning a small ramp for the front steps so Mason could roll in easily. The first time they visited, it was a warm Saturday afternoon. Mason's laughter echoed across the lawn as Sarah lifted him from the car, and for the first time, my house felt like a home. But it didn't take long for the neighborhood to notice. Within an hour, I caught sight of Karen across the street, clipboard in hand, standing perfectly still. She wasn't waving or smiling, just watching. It sent a chill through me, though I couldn't explain why. 2 days later, a thin white envelope appeared in my mailbox. Notice of non-compliance. Apparently, temporary accessibility modifications required HOA approval. I laughed at first, thinking it had to be a mistake. It was just a lightweight aluminum ramp, not permanent, not obstructive. But the next day, Mark showed up on my doorstep. "Mrs. Matthews wanted me to remind you," he said gently, "that any exterior changes must be pre-approved to maintain uniformity." His tone was polite, but the message was clear. I was already on the radar. It might have ended there if not for the next incident. One evening, Sarah returned from a late shift, still in her blue scrubs. She parked in my driveway, walked Mason inside, and we all sat together watching TV. Around 9, the doorbell rang. It was Barbara, another board member, new and overeager, clipboard tucked under her arm. "We've received some concern," she said, "about unfamiliar vehicles being parked overnight." Her eyes flicked toward Sarah's car. "We just want to make sure we know who's coming and going." The implication stung. "That's my sister," I said evenly. "She's family." "Oh, of course," Barbara replied, smiling tightly. "It's just a policy. We like to keep track." "For safety." After she left, Sarah looked shaken. "Do they really keep tabs on who visits?" she whispered. I shrugged it off, but the question lingered. Over the next few weeks, the tension grew almost imperceptibly, like a storm forming beyond the horizon. Every morning, I'd notice small changes. My trash bin slightly moved from where I left it, footprints by the porch, a car parked just down the street that seemed to idle a little too long. The Facebook group buzzed with subtle jabs about certain residents bending rules. None mentioned my name, but I could feel the target on my back. Then came the meeting notice, a formal invitation to attend the monthly HOA board session to discuss ongoing property concerns. The phrasing was vague, but my stomach sank as soon as I read it. When I arrived that night, the room felt like a courtroom. Karen sat at the center of the long oak table, flanked by her board members. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish and tension. "Emily," she said smoothly, motioning to the chair opposite her, "we just wanted to clarify a few things. We've noticed some irregularities regarding your property." I nodded, forcing a calm I didn't feel. "If this is about the ramp, it's temporary. My nephew—" "Yes, we're aware," she interrupted, her tone clipped but polite. "It's not about the boy. It's about precedent. If we allow one homeowner to make changes without approval, it opens the door for chaos. We have to maintain standards." Her words hung in the air like smoke. I could see Richard shifting uncomfortably beside her, but he said nothing. "I understand that," I said quietly. "But this isn't a decoration. It's accessibility." Karen's smile didn't waver. "We all sympathize, truly. But rules are rules." When I left that night, I noticed Barbara waiting by her car outside, pretending to scroll through her phone but clearly watching me. The next morning, another notice arrived, this time warning of fines for unauthorized modifications. That was when the atmosphere of Whispering Pines began to change. Neighbors who used to wave now crossed the street instead. Conversations stopped when I walked by. I started hearing whispers. "She's difficult. She's stirring things up. Karen's trying to keep order." But it wasn't order they were protecting. It was control. The final straw came 2 weeks later, when Sarah was confronted outside my house by Barbara again. This time in full daylight, Clippard raised like a weapon. "I'm sorry, but we've had reports that your presence is disruptive," she said coldly. "You're not a registered resident." Sarah's hands trembled. "I'm her sister," she said, voice shaking. "I'm just visiting," Barbara's tone sharpened. "Then perhaps you should limit your visits." I stepped out just in time to hear those words. The anger that had been simmering in me for weeks finally boiled over. "You don't get to tell my family when they can visit," I snapped. "You don't own this street." For the first time, Barbara's composure cracked. "We enforce the community standards," she said, but her voice wavered. "If you have an issue, take it up with Mrs. Matthews." "I plan to," I said, slamming my door behind me. That night, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the pile of violation notices, 4 in total, each one more absurd than the last. I felt cornered. The ramp, the car, the so-called visitor policy, and it was clear none of this was about rules anymore. It was about breaking me down, about reminding me who held the power here. But what Karen didn't realize was that I wasn't someone who backed down easily. I'd faced worse than suburban politics, and I wasn't about to let a self-appointed dictator decide who my family could be. Still, beneath my anger was something else, fear. Because even as I planned my next move, I could feel something shifting in the air. The neighborhood lights seemed colder at night, the shadows longer. I'd catch glimpses of figures watching from windows, whispering behind hedges. It was as if the entire community had become an audience for a show I never auditioned for, and I was the villain in their script. The next morning, a bright orange slip fluttered on my door. Final warning. As I held the paper in my trembling hands, a single thought echoed in my head. This wasn't just about a ramp or even about rules. It was about power, control, and the kind of quiet tyranny that hides behind HOA letterheads and smiling faces. I didn't know it yet, but the storm had only just begun. And soon, every perfect little lie in Whispering Pines would start to crack. Because when people like Karen Matthews push too far, something always gives. And when it does, it doesn't break quietly. It started with a letter. Just one. A plain white envelope tucked under my doormat like a warning disguised as routine mail. Violation notice, unauthorized exterior modification. The same message as before, but this time the tone was sharper, colder. Failure to comply within 10 days may result in daily fines up to $250 and potential legal action. Legal action. Over a lightweight aluminum ramp that made it possible for my nephew to enter the house. I stared at the page, the words swimming. It wasn't just a notice, it was a threat, dressed in polite formatting. I tried calling the HOA office that morning. No answer. Then I emailed, attaching photos, explaining again that the ramp wasn't permanent, that it didn't alter the structure of the home. I even included a copy of the Fair Housing Act clause about accessibility modifications. But within an hour, I received a reply, short, icy. The HOA board has reviewed your concerns. Rules remain in effect. Non-compliance will result in further action. That night, the neighborhood group chat exploded. A post from Barbara. Some homeowners believe rules don't apply to them. Remember, our community standards protect us all. No names, of course, but everyone knew who she meant. The replies rolled in, little emojis of approval. Thank you for keeping our neighborhood beautiful, and glad someone's watching out. The next morning, I noticed something new. A camera, tiny, barely visible, mounted on a lamppost across the street, angled perfectly toward my driveway. My stomach twisted. They were watching now, literally watching. I called the HOA again, demanding to know why a camera was pointed at my home. Karen's voice was calm, almost patronizing. "Oh, that's a neighborhood security initiative," she said sweetly. "Installed for everyone's safety. Surely you support safety, don't you, Emily?" Safety! The word echoed in my mind as I looked out at the lens glinting in the sunlight. It didn't feel like safety. It felt like surveillance. Over the following days, things escalated fast. My mailbox was flagged for being 2 inches taller than regulation height. A warning was taped to my garbage bin for being visible for an extended period after pickup. They fined me for a weed growth exceeding 1 inch despite my yard being immaculate. Each letter felt like a new layer of pressure, pushing down until breathing in that house began to feel suffocating. Sarah tried to stay calm for Mason's sake. She'd whisper, "Don't let them get to you," even as her own hands trembled when another notice appeared. Mason, sweet and oblivious, asked once, "Aunt Emily, why does that lady always stare at our house?" I didn't have an answer. Then came the petty whispers. I'd walk my dog in the evenings and feel eyes following me. One neighbor, Mrs. Conway, stopped watering her flowers whenever I passed. Another Mr. Pratt suddenly forgot to wave. The only one who still smiled was Richard, the vice president, who looked increasingly uncomfortable every time our eyes met. One day, as I checked my mail, he approached quietly. "Emily," he murmured, "maybe it's best to just take it down. You're not going to win against her." His voice held both warning and pity, but I wasn't ready to back down. I filed a formal complaint with the city's Fair Housing Office, citing harassment and discrimination. That's when the real storm began. A week later, I woke up to find a bright orange sticker plastered across my garage door. "Property in violation, subject to fine." My neighbors stopped pretending not to look. I could feel their eyes on me as I peeled the notice off, the glue ripping paint as it tore away. Sarah stepped outside, furious. "This is harassment," she said, grabbing her phone to record. That's when Barbara appeared from her house across the street, phone already in hand. "Documenting a violation," she said smugly. "The ramp's still there." "Document this," Sarah snapped back, pointing at the orange sticker. "You're out of line." The shouting drew others out. The Conways, the Pratts, even Karen, walking briskly down the sidewalk, expression calm, but eyes sharp. "Let's not escalate things," she said, voice like ice. "You're disturbing the peace? Disturbing the—" Sarah started, but I pulled her back. "Don't," I whispered. "That's what they want." Later that day, another notice arrived. Noise complaint filed. My fine total now exceeded $200. I spent that night pacing, unable to sleep. I kept hearing the faint hum of the new security camera, its little red light blinking through my window blinds. Every creak of the house felt amplified. Around midnight, I saw movement outside. Barbara again, flashlight in hand, scribbling notes in her pad as she stood near the curb. My anger boiled. I stepped outside, barefoot on the cold concrete. "What are you doing?" I demanded. She startled, then straightened. "Routine inspection. At midnight?" Her smirk didn't waver. "Some of us care about the community. You're trespassing. Sidewalk's public," she said. Then turned and walked off. The next morning, the HOA Facebook group lit up again. "Please remember to report suspicious behavior." We've had reports of homeowners being confrontational with board members. By now, the fines were piling faster than I could pay. Letters threatened property liens. Calls went unanswered. Every day brought a new absurd rule. The most ridiculous? A notice that my bird feeder violated wildlife feeding regulations. I laughed when I read it. The sound hollow. "They're coming after the birds now," Sarah muttered. but laughter couldn't cover the dread. Then came the community inspection day. Karen herself led the tour, clipboard in hand, a group of board members trailing like soldiers. I watched from behind my blinds as they stopped at each home, smiling, chatting, pretending this was normal. When they reached mine, Karen paused longer. Her eyes flicked up to my window. I didn't move. The following afternoon, an envelope arrived, heavier than usual. Notice of intent to seek legal remedy. The words blurred as I read. They were threatening to take me to court for chronic non-compliance. They claimed I had refused multiple requests to remove unauthorized structures and that my behavior was disruptive to community harmony. I felt my chest tighten. It wasn't just about the ramp anymore. It was war. That evening, I went to confront her. The HOA office was in the clubhouse, a sterile room that smelled of coffee and disinfectant. Karen sat behind the desk, typing. She didn't look up. "I got your notice," I said, voice shaking. "Oh," she said, feigning innocence. "Which one?" "You know which one. You're threatening legal action now?" Karen finally looked up, her eyes gleaming. "Emily, you chose this path. You could have resolved this quietly months ago." "This is harassment," I said. "You're abusing your power." Her smile widened, slow and deliberate. "Power?" she repeated softly. "You think this is power?" "This is order. Without it, people like you ruin neighborhoods like this." I stepped closer, my voice trembling with fury. "People like me?" She leaned forward, lowering her tone. "The kind who think rules are optional, who invite problems, who make others uncomfortable." I stared at her, speechless. Then she picked up her pen, dismissing me with a glance. "You should really talk to a lawyer before you dig yourself in deeper." That night, I called one. The attorney listened carefully, then sighed. HOA disputes can get ugly. They know how to drain you financially before you ever reach court. "But," he paused, "if they've overstepped, we can fight this." That became my lifeline. I started documenting everything, every letter, every fine, every whispered insult. Sarah helped me compile photos, timestamps, emails. Even Richard, the vice president, quietly slipped a few internal memos under my door one night. "You didn't get these from me," he whispered. The memos showed discussions about targeting non-compliant residents, a list with my name circled in red ink. The discovery fueled me. I filed formal complaints with the State Housing Department and contacted a local journalist who specialized in HOA corruption. Days later, a white sedan began parking down the block. Same car, every night, always empty. I knew they were watching. The harassment intensified. My trash cans disappeared one morning, then reappeared dented and filthy 2 blocks away. Someone poured bleach over my flower beds. The next week, my mailbox was smashed. The HOA claimed vandalism unrelated to association activity. I didn't believe that for a second. Sarah begged me to move. "It's not worth it," she said, tears in her eyes. "They're destroying you." But I couldn't leave. I'd paid for this home with years of saving, of working double shifts. I wasn't about to let them win by bullying me out. Then, something changed. Whispers started spreading enough. Not about me, but about Karen. Rumors of misused HOA funds, invoices that didn't add up. A neighbor named Paul approached me quietly one morning while walking his dog. "I heard what they're doing to you," he said. "You're not the only one." She fined me for painting my shutters the wrong shade of beige. "Beige," he chuckled bitterly. "I've got receipts. If you're fighting back, I'll help." Others followed. One by one, neighbors began confessing their own battles. Absurd fines, intimidation tactics, threats of liens. The picture was bigger than I'd realized. Karen wasn't maintaining order. She was maintaining control through fear. The tension in Whispering Pines thickened like fog. People started whispering in corners, avoiding eye contact in public. The Facebook group grew quiet, then erupted when someone anonymously posted, "Ask where your HOA dues are really going." It was only up for a few minutes before being deleted, but it spread like wildfire. Karen doubled down. She called an emergency meeting to address the false accusations being circulated. Flyers went up overnight. I attended, sitting near the back, watching her command the room. She stood at the front in her usual pristine outfit, voice smooth and confident. "These rumors are baseless," she declared. "They come from individuals who have repeatedly violated our trust and our community standards. Her gaze locked on me mid-sentence. Some people, she continued, would rather destroy what others have built than take responsibility for their own choices. A few heads turned my way. I didn't flinch. When the meeting ended, Richard caught my eye from across the room. He didn't speak, just gave a faint, almost imperceptible nod, a silent promise that something was shifting. But before change could come, things had to break. A week later, I received another notice, this one almost laughably desperate. Your grass exceeds community standards for acceptable height. I hadn't even cut it late. I went outside and measured. It was exactly 2.5 inches. The limit was 3. They're losing control, Sarah said softly. That's why they're panicking. Still, the stress was getting to me. Nights filled with anxiety, mornings with dread. Even Mason had grown quiet, avoiding the windows. The final straw came on a humid Thursday afternoon when Sarah came home early and found a man in a security vest standing in our backyard, measuring the fence. "Excuse me," she shouted, running outside. He looked startled. "I'm with HOA Compliance," he said, flashing a laminated badge. "You're trespassing," she snapped. "Get out." He left quickly, but when I called the HOA demanding an explanation, Karen's assistant simply said, "Routine property assessment." That was it. Something inside me snapped. I gathered every document, every photo, every video clip. Then, with shaking hands, I hit send on an email to the journalist. Subject line, "You wanted proof? Here it is." Within days, the story hit the local news. Whispering Pines HOA accused of harassment and misuse of funds. The article featured excerpts of emails, leaked memos, photos of the orange violation notices covering my front door. Karen called it defamation. I called it justice starting to wake up, but the fallout didn't come quietly. Karen stormed to my house that evening, her car screeching into my driveway. She got out, eyes wild, voice trembling with rage. "You've ruined everything," she hissed. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I stood in the doorway, steady this time. "Yes," I said. I told the truth. She stepped closer, so close I could smell her perfume. "You'll regret this," she whispered. I didn't answer. I just closed the door. That night, as thunder rolled outside, I sat by the window, watching rain pour over the street. The camera light across the way flickered once, then went dark. For the first time in months, the silence didn't feel oppressive. It felt like anticipation, like the air before a breaking storm, because I knew this wasn't over. The story had broken open, but Karen wasn't the type to surrender quietly. She would fight, claw, and threaten until the very end, and I was ready. The battle for Whispering Pines had just reached its breaking point, and soon the entire neighborhood would see exactly what kind of monster had been hiding behind that perfect white picket fence. It happened on a Friday morning, the kind of calm, golden morning that almost felt cruel in its serenity. Birds chirped, sprinklers hissed, and somewhere a lawnmower droned softly in the distance. On any other day, it would have felt peaceful, but not that day. Because when I opened my front door, I froze. The ramp, Ethan's ramp, was gone. At first, I thought maybe it had been moved. Maybe a maintenance crew had mistakenly taken it. But when I stepped outside and saw the faint scrape marks on the concrete where it had been ripped away, the truth hit me like a gut punch. It wasn't a mistake. Someone had taken it deliberately. Inside, Ethan's voice broke the silence. "Uncle James, I can't go outside." He sat by the doorway in his wheelchair, small hands gripping the armrests, eyes glossy with confusion. That look, that helplessness, cracked something in me. I ran down the steps and scanned the street. Everything looked ordinary, unnervingly ordinary. Then I saw her, Karen Matthews, standing in her driveway in her crisp tennis whites, clipboard tucked neatly under one arm, a faint smirk pulling at her lips. She didn't even try to hide it. I walked across the street, my pulse pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "Where is it?" I demanded. Karen adjusted her sunglasses, pretending to squint against the light. "Excuse me?" "The ramp," I said through clenched teeth. "You took it." "Where is it?" Her expression was pure satisfaction. "It was an unauthorized structure," she said evenly. "The board voted to remove it. Section 23 grants us the right to remediate non-compliant additions to maintain community standards. I stared at her in disbelief. That ramp was for my nephew. He can't get out of the house without it, she shrugged, her tone as casual as if we were discussing lawn decorations. Rules are rules. You had 48 hours to comply. You chose not to. I could feel the heat rising in my face. You had no right to touch my property. Karen tilted her head, her smirk growing sharper. Technically, I didn't touch it. The maintenance contractor did, and it's already been disposed of, so she trailed off with a mock sigh. There's nothing to be done now. I stood there for a long moment, staring at her, at this woman who saw her clipboard as a weapon and her bylaws as a shield. My fists clenched. My breath came unevenly. Every ounce of anger, frustration, and disbelief I'd bottled up for months boiled over. You didn't just break a rule, Karen, I said, voice shaking. You broke the law. For the first time, her smugness flickered. Excuse me? That ramp is medical equipment, I said, my voice low, steady now. It's protected under federal law. You destroyed something that was essential to a disabled child's mobility. That's not a violation of HOA policy. That's a violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Her lips parted, but no words came out. I took out my phone. Smile, I said coldly, raising the camera. You'll want to look your best for the police report. I snapped the photo as she flinched, her composure cracking just enough to see the panic behind her eyes. Then I turned and walked away. That afternoon, I made 2 calls, one to a lawyer specializing in ADA cases and one to the police. The officer on the line listened carefully, and by the time I finished explaining, his tone had changed from routine to serious. You're saying HOA representatives physically removed and disposed of mobility equipment? He asked. Yes, I said. And I have witnesses and documentation. He paused. We'll be in touch. The next few days were a blur of paperwork, emails, and legal jargon. My attorney moved fast. Letters went out to the HOA and to Karen personally, outlining every violation in excruciating detail. Theft of medical equipment, property destruction, civil rights violations under the ADA and Fair Housing Act. Each charge came with potential fines, penalties, and even criminal consequences. By Monday morning, the whole neighborhood was buzzing. Whispering Pines had always loved gossip, and now it had the juiciest story of all. People peeked from behind curtains, whispered in driveways, sent texts that started with, "Did you hear?" Karen tried to get ahead of it. She called an emergency HOA meeting that very evening, claiming it was to address false accusations being circulated. Flyers appeared on every doorstep overnight, printed in bold type with the HOA seal, attendance mandatory. I went, of course. I wanted to see it. The clubhouse was packed that night, standing room only. Normally, HOA meetings drew maybe 6 or 7 people. Now the entire neighborhood had shown up. The air buzzed with tension. Karen stood at the front, flanked by her loyal board members. Richard, who looked pale and uncomfortable, and Nancy, who sat stiffly, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Karen cleared her throat, gripping the podium like a lifeline. "Thank you all for coming to such short notice," she began, voice steady but tight. "There's been a great deal of misinformation circulating regarding recent enforcement actions by the board. I want to be perfectly clear, all actions taken were within our rights as outlined by the HOA charter." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone in the back whispered, "She took a kid's wheelchair ramp." Karen's smile faltered, but she pressed on. "Certain individuals are attempting to weaponize federal law to undermine our community's integrity. These accusations of discrimination are baseless and defamatory." I raised my hand, slowly, deliberately. Her jaw tightened. "Yes, Mr. Lawson?" I stood. The room fell silent. "Baseless?" I said. "Karen, you destroyed a ramp used by an 11-year-old boy in a wheelchair." Her eyes narrowed. "The board acted according to procedure." I cut her off. "You acted illegally. You violated the ADA, the Fair Housing Act, and basic human decency." Gasps rippled through the room. Karen tried to speak, but I held up a folder, thick with documents. "This," I said, "is the report my attorney sent you. This is the letter from the police department acknowledging a pending investigation. And this I clicked my phone, projecting a photo onto the meeting's digital display. Is you standing on my property while your maintenance worker removes the ramp? The room erupted. Shouts, whispers, phones, snapping photos. Karen's face went pale, then red, then pale again. That's not... It's time-stamped, I said, my voice cutting through the chaos. 6:15 a.m. last Saturday. You ordered the removal, and you watched as medical equipment for a disabled child was thrown into a truck and driven away. You think this is about rules? This is about cruelty. Her composure shattered. You're twisting things? She shouted. The board approved it. Richard suddenly stood. His hands trembled slightly as he spoke. That's not true. We never voted on that, Karen. You sent the order yourself. I told you it was wrong. All eyes swung toward him. Karen's mouth opened, but no sound came. Nancy spoke next, voice shaky. She said it was urgent. That it was just temporary enforcement? The crowd murmured louder now. A woman from the back, the one with the autistic son, raised her hand. You fined me for putting up a sensory swing for my child. Said it disrupted the neighborhood aesthetic. Then another voice. You told me to remove my handrail after surgery. And another. You threatened to tow my car because my disabled parking placard wasn't the right color. The noise swelled into a storm of voices. Angry, hurt, defiant. Karen banged the gavel over and over, shouting for order, but no one listened anymore. Her power, that iron grip she'd held over Whispering Pines for years, was slipping. Then, from the front row, the maintenance worker stood up. He looked nervous, pale but determined. I did remove the ramp, he said quietly. The room fell still again. Mrs. Matthews told me it was an unauthorized structure. I didn't know it belonged to a disabled kid. She told me to take it straight to the landfill so it couldn't be retrieved. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Karen turned on him, eyes blazing. That's a lie. But his voice didn't waver. No, ma'am, it's not. The silence that followed was deafening. Karen's composure cracked entirely then. She slammed her clipboard down on the podium, papers scattering. You're all ungrateful, she spat. Everything I've done was to keep this place from turning into chaos. Without rules, without order, this community would fall apart. A man near the back shouted, You're the only chaos here! That broke the dam. The crowd erupted, years of frustration and resentment pouring out at once. People shouted about their own fines, their own humiliation, their own fear of her. It was raw, chaotic, cathartic. Karen's face twisted in fury and panic. She grabbed her papers and fled the room, her heels clicking hard against the tile. 2 days later, police cruisers appeared on Whispering Pines Lane, one parked in front of Karen's pristine white Colonial. Officers knocked on her door. She answered, pale and trembling. Neighbors gathered quietly at their windows, phones in hand. When the officers led her down the walkway, she wasn't handcuffed, but she might as well have been. The sight alone was enough. Whispering Pines had finally seen its queen fall. Word spread fast. She'd been charged with theft, destruction of medical equipment, and multiple ADA violations. The district attorney's office called me personally, thanking me for coming forward. It's rare, the prosecutor said, for these cases to be so well documented. By the end of the week, Karen resigned as HOA president. The board disbanded pending investigation. The neighborhood was quiet again, eerily so, as if everyone was collectively holding their breath. Then came the news of the plea deal. 6 months of house arrest, 5 years probation, full restitution for damages, fines, and a lifetime ban from serving on any HOA board again. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The woman who once ruled her neighbors with threats of fines and restrictions would now be confined by her own. The morning after her sentencing, I stood on my porch watching as a moving truck backed into her driveway. Karen emerged, head down, hair unkempt, wearing plain clothes that looked nothing like the pristine perfection she once displayed. She didn't look like an authority figure anymore. She looked small. She glanced across the street at me. Our eyes met for a brief, charged moment. There was no smirk this time, no clipboard, no arrogance, only exhaustion. Then she turned away. Ethan rolled up beside me, the sun glinting off the new ramp, solid, secure, permanent. Is she leaving? He asked softly. Yes, I said. She is, he smiled, small but genuine. Good. We watched in silence as the truck door closed and the vehicle pulled away, taking with it the last remnants of her reign. Later that day, the community gathered informally at the park. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in months laughed, shared coffee, even apologized to one another. Richard approached me quietly. "You did the right thing," he said. "We were all too scared to stop her," I nodded. "It shouldn't have taken this long." "No," he agreed, "but maybe now we can start over." That night, as dusk settled over Whispering Pines, the air felt different, lighter, freer. The tension that had once hung thick over every cul-de-sac and hedged lawn had finally lifted. For the first time in years, the neighborhood didn't feel like a gilded cage. It felt like home again. And yet, as I looked at the empty house across the street, her house, I couldn't shake one thought. How easily it had all happened. How one person's hunger for control had nearly crushed an entire community. Power, I realized, doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. It hides behind bylaws, behind friendly emails and printed notices, until one day, it's too big to ignore, but that day at least, justice had spoken louder, and as the street lights flickered on and the quiet hum of evening returned, I couldn't help but wonder how many other neighborhoods were still living under their own quiet tyrants, waiting for someone brave enough to finally fight back. The weeks after Karen's downfall felt like living in the aftermath of a storm, one that had torn through every corner of Whispering Pines, leaving debris in its wake, both visible and unseen. The lawns were still perfectly trimmed, the mailboxes still aligned in their uniform neatness, but something fundamental had shifted beneath the surface. For the first time in years, people looked one another in the eye when they passed on the street. Maybe someday they'll see our story and realize that silence is what keeps the chains locked tight. That sometimes you don't need permission to do what's right, because peace isn't given by people like Karen. It's taken back by people who finally decide enough is enough. And when that day comes, when every cul-de-sac, every pristine street, every gated community learns to stand up for its own humanity, maybe then we'll finally stop calling them rules. Maybe then we'll start calling them what they should have been all along: rights.